I want to let off steam by telling this story. I can't name names because I don't want anyone to accuse me of anything. I don't consider myself guilty, but I think the world should know the evil we faced, or the one that stalked us. What I lost that day, I could never recover, no matter how much I asked God for. That was my punishment for being so impulsive with my crazy ideas. In the end, I paid too high a price, and the worst thing was that I didn't do it alone. At that time, I was 21 years old, the same age as my best friend. We were both on vacation from university. It's worth mentioning that we were always passionate about the paranormal, and at that time we had already experimented with some well-known games, but none of them met our expectations. It was then that it occurred to me that if we wanted to try the Ouija board, we should do it in a place with a lot of energy from beyond. I considered a cemetery, then a church, but in the end, I decided on a funeral home where there were some corpses. My best friend agreed, so we chose which one it was going to be. Luckily, I knew the girl who ran the place and I managed to invite her to the movies. My intention was to steal the keys to the funeral home, and I managed to do so when she was not looking. When I met up with my best friend again, we were completely overcome with emotion. I really wanted to do that and see if we could contact some spirit from beyond. Adrenaline was rushing through my body. I couldn't wait, and thanks to the girl who ran the place, I was able to find out which night there would be no one at the funeral home, so we snuck out that night. We found the corpse that had just been prepared, and we sat down on the floor next to it, and there we took out the Ouija board. My hands were shaking with excitement, that adrenaline. I liked it, and so we started the game. We had a pen and paper to write down each letter, and by asking questions we confirmed that, in fact, we were in the presence of not just one entity from beyond, but several. We got very excited, until there was one that told us letter by letter that the body was dead. But the entities that were lurking around there were not. That felt like a very strong threat, but the emotion was greater than the fear, so we continued. As we advanced, I felt the need to leave that game there. We had already confirmed that those entities existed, and we managed to have contact with them. There was nothing else for us, and it was then that an entity asked us who of the two of us preferred to be buried in the back of the funeral home. The excitement suddenly went away, and we both looked at each other in terror. One of the lights exploded, and we were left almost only with the moonlight coming through the window, and that was when we decided it was time to leave. We didn't know that the worst night of our lives was just beginning. Something we couldn't see started hitting us and knocking us down as we approached the stairs. When we were about to get there, something grabbed me by the foot, knocked me down, and dragged me back to the room where the corpse was. My best friend came back for me, helped me stand up, and we ran back to the stairs. This time we did manage to get down to the first floor, but we got disoriented. The place was a bit big, and we didn't know where the door we had entered through was. Apart from that, we started to hear laughter coming from the second floor, including a lady who told us that we shouldn't forget the board, and seconds later it fell from the ceiling at our feet. We ran from one side to the other in search of the exit, but it was all in vain. In the end, just as they grabbed me, they did with my best friend, and they took him to the back. I tried to follow him, but once he was outside the door closed, and I couldn't open it. I went to the window and looked out there, watching how he was dragged and slammed against the walls. Seconds later, the board reached my feet, and a phrase began to form that I read with total shock. This phrase that marked the board was, "The devil is here." After that, all paranormal activity stopped, the doors opened, and my friend came out completely terrified and trembling. I kicked the board, and we ran out of there while behind us we heard a horrible breathing like something giant. Thank God we managed to get out of that place, and we didn't talk about it again. We simply tried to forget what we lived and hope that nothing bad happened to us from that night on. I can't say that I haven't had very recurrent nightmares where I wake up crying because I can see a very dark, gloomy place full of screams where I feel a burning in my chest from how depressing it is. I think that since that night, I can see hell in my nightmares, and the devil has been watching me ever since. My name is Gabriel. As we have heard before in some videos, people should already know that sometimes we are born with a very special gift, as if God himself had touched us in person. Some can see the future and develop that ability, calling it clairvoyance. Others can heal without having any knowledge of medicine, a very well-known skill among shamans, the same one that made Pachita famous here in the United States. However, my ability is a little more peculiar than those. I am able to have a normal and casual conversation with the corpses before their souls go to heaven, and now I want to tell you the story of why I gave that up. At that time, I was working in a funeral home, and I was doing very well. Sometimes I prepared the bodies, and other times I was an organizer. My salary was more than modest because the director increased it every time I showed him that having me there brought him a lot of profit. Many people already knew that I could communicate with the dead, and in that way they made requests of me, such as asking the deceased questions about things they left unfinished before dying, and I never let them down. I want to explain a little about my gift because I know that it is very curious. Once I am in the presence of the corpse, all I have to do is ask it a question for it to open its eyes and answer me. Very rarely does he stand up or sit down, but here is where it gets interesting. Only I can see and hear when this happens. That is to say, while my eyes show me and allow me to hear a body sitting on a stretcher, in front of the others, the corpse remains lying without making any noise. Of course, it is obvious that they will hear me, but they would hardly understand the conversation. My companions know about this gift. At first, they did not believe me, but with time, I found a way to make them believe me. In addition, the happiness of the people who made requests to me was clear proof that I could have contact with souls before they departed to heaven. Here is where I must confess that not all of them went there. I do not usually talk to all corpses. I only have a few. However, those who don't go to heaven are those who spoke to me without me asking them anything. I always notice them with their heads down, sad, and sometimes angry. Despite having this gift, I have many doubts about how things work, or at least I don't know the limits. There were corpses that moved tables, chairs, and everything, and my colleagues could see and feel that. There was one occasion when the director was hit in the head with one of the surgical tools. That's why they first left me half an hour with the corpse that arrived. And if I noticed that it wasn't hostile or that it didn't speak to me, my colleague came in to help me prepare it. It goes without saying that there were some that made me feel a lot of terror and fear, but nothing compares to the one that arrived to change everything. The clock struck 12 noon when they notified us of the arrival of a new corpse, which we had 2 days to prepare and have ready for the wake. It took longer than usual, to be honest, but we didn't question it. We deduced that it must have been something about the itinerary or something like that. I wanted to take a look at the body immediately because I felt something inside, as if it was somehow calling me for something urgent. It was a teenager who took his own life because of depression. Cases like that made me think a lot. He must have suffered too much to make such a horrible decision, but I never dared to question something like that because everyone knows what problems they have in their life. It happened that when I was alone with the body, I whispered to it that I was very sorry for what happened, and I waited for its answer. My gift had never failed me, but that time the body didn't answer me or open its eyes. In fact, it didn't do any movement. I looked around with my heart racing. My mind went blank, unable to form any hypothesis about what was happening. I asked him another question again, and he didn't answer it either. At that moment, my partner arrived to tell me that we would just make a few touch-ups to the corpse, and that the next day we would have it ready. That's what we did, and in the middle of the process, he asked me if the corpse had already told me something. I answered no, and that was all I said because I didn't want to talk about it. My facial expression spoke for me. I wasn't afraid of losing my gift. In fact, I would have understood if that were the case, but I knew there was something else there. The next night, when we had to get the corpse ready for the wake, my partner called me to tell me that he couldn't go to the funeral home and asked me to cover it. I didn't have any problem because I myself frequently asked for those favors. I put on the necessary clothes to prepare the corpse and I began. But 2 hours later, the corpse opened its eyes and stared at me. I backed away, almost falling and tripping over the table behind me. The body sat up, staring at me. I was speechless, and then he told me to give up my gift because evil had already realized what I was doing and would soon corrupt or harm me. I kept my composure and told him there was nothing to worry about, but he insisted, revealing that his death had not been suicide, but caused by a powerful demon without anyone being able to realize that he was possessed. I found this curious since possession in humans leaves many signs, But I maintained my point that there was nothing to fear, and that was when I witnessed the most paranormal activity of my life. Tables started moving from side to side, tools flew through the air, and I heard a large number of voices telling me to run away, or else they would end my life. The corpse itself told me to do it, that I would be safe if from then on I resigned myself to never using my gift again. I had no choice but to run out of the funeral home and go home. I returned in the morning and was surprised to find that the body was already ready and prepared. Someone did the rest of the work, but I never asked who it was. I tidied up everything that was scattered on the floor, and when my boss arrived, everything was ready. The wake was held, and after that, I announced that I would never use my gift again. I preferred to stay alive. After that, I never heard from another dead person. I am about to tell you a story that left me with the most doubts I have ever had in my entire life. It was something so mysterious that to this day no one has been able to explain it. I am aware that there are many mysteries in the world and that evil manifests itself in ways that man still cannot understand, but what I saw was completely macabre. I was one of the two in charge of preparing bodies in a funeral home for their respective wake. My partner was kind, and I must confess that she was much more skilled than me. Sometimes she gave me advice on how to improve because at that time I had only been working for 8 months. I often asked her if she had never had contact with the paranormal, and she answered that she had never had any contact with the paranormal. She managed to experience certain things, but she wasn't sure if she could classify them as paranormal activity. However, she made it very clear that a job at the funeral home entailed being on the same ground as the souls of the unfortunate people who lost their lives, so it was impossible to work there for so long without feeling or seeing something that didn't seem to be from this world. At least we agreed on that. In some way, we were close to the barrier that divided the world of the living from the world of the dead. I always had my faith in God intact, trusting that He would protect me from all the evil in the world, or at least from the evil that surrounded me. Honestly, I didn't worry about those things. I tried to be very respectful with the bodies and attend the wakes to show my respect. That's how that day came when they didn't bring us any corpse, but that of a person I knew, with whom I had shared good times, enough to know that he was a good person. I was shocked to hear of his death in that way, and my partner realized what was happening. She even told me that if I wanted, she would take care of preparing it herself without any problem, but I refused since I had to adopt a professional attitude. I did what I could, but in a short time, I told my partner that I accepted her proposal to cover for me while I took the time to go to the house of this friend who passed away. They had been very good to me in the past, and I had to show some respect. So I did. I spoke to the family and gave them my condolences, but I was quick to ask how it happened. Apparently, no one knew. He simply had a heart attack while he was sleeping, and that was it. I couldn't believe that, not after knowing that he led a very healthy life, exercising and everything, and he wasn't even 30 years old. Apart from that, I inquired about his twin brother. I didn't see him at home, and his family said they hadn't seen him since my friend died. That seemed strange to me. It wasn't normal behavior since he should be at home at least supporting his mother. I wasn't a detective, but I had a lot of respect for him, and I wasn't going to stay with the intrigue, at least not without trying to discover the truth. The thing is that I had no tools or clues, apart from the fact that the funeral director asked me to help with the arrangements for the wake. In the end, all I could do was ask God to have mercy on that poor soul and allow him entry into his kingdom. That same night before the wake, I received a visit from a lady at the funeral home. She said she wanted to talk to me, so I went down and received her. It wasn't a very long visit. She was there just to tell me that evil was going to be at the funeral home the next night and to be very careful about that. That was even stranger. I didn't know that lady, and it was the first time I saw her. I found it strange that she came there exclusively to look for me and tell me that. I didn't understand for what purpose. It was as if she was warning me about something, but I couldn't figure it out. That's how the night of the wake came, which I obviously attended. I greeted the family of my deceased friend. We made a nice decoration and better than their budget could afford, all thanks to the director since my partner told him about the situation, and he helped me with that great gesture. While there, I was able to see my friend's twin brother. He was sitting apart. I barely saw him exchange words with his relatives, but very few. My mind told me that something very strange was happening there, but I couldn't play detective because we were in the funeral home. I could have put my job at risk, and that was something I couldn't risk. Suddenly, he stood up and walked away to a deserted area of the funeral home. I took advantage of that to follow him and see what he was up to. Being alone, I could see his back, and I asked him if he was okay or if he needed help, but I began to hear murmurs as if he were whispering. I had no choice but to surround him and look at his face, and that was when I was stunned. His eyes lacked pupils. They were completely white. He spoke to himself, saying that he had to do it. He had no other option but to give up his brother's soul in order to save himself. Otherwise, he would go looking for him. I had a hard time believing that he wasn't talking to me because he wasn't aware of my presence. It was like he was in some kind of trance or something. I can't describe it any other way. In the end, my boss called me and I had to leave him there alone, but when I wanted to go back, he was gone, and I had to go back to finish the wake with my colleagues. Days later, I found out that my friend's twin was missing. Nobody knew where he was. The police started a search, but it was in vain. They never found him. That was the last I heard about that case. I was left with many questions, but one thing was certain for me. My friend did not die of a heart attack, at least not naturally. Only God knows the truth. That's all I can say. Since I was little, I was taught that one must do whatever it takes to get ahead and progress in life. I have always been ambitious. Those close to me can attest to that. However, I am not proud of that time when I worked with a funeral director. Things were not going so well, and I had to resort to doing something unethical and immoral in order to bring good money home. I will not reveal my name for obvious reasons, but I do want you to know my story. As I mentioned before, I worked in a funeral home. I had a good relationship with my colleagues and the director. My position was very important, and a lot of responsibility fell on my shoulders. We were the only funeral home in the surrounding area of the city, and like everything, sometimes we had ups and downs. The thing is that one day I got tired of things being that way. I wanted us to keep a streak of good abundance without caring that it meant that many people had to die. Those not-so-good times were what ruined my plans to build a new room so that I could do 2 wakes in one night. I had taken care of the plans and everything. All that was missing was the director's approval along with the release of the budget. But at first glance, it was clear that it was not profitable, not with what we were collecting at that time. I realized then that I had to do something, or I would have to dedicate myself to something else, look for another job and count on my salary being modest or at least comparable to this one. I had already received offers from other funeral homes, but I was fond of that one and the director because they were the first to give me a hand. That's how I managed to get into the most dangerous part of the neighborhood where the funeral home was, and to top it off at night. I wanted to get involved with. I was a member of the organized crime group, and so I did. I managed to get their attention until I was face to face with them, and with all the fear in the world but with a lot of confidence, I told them that I had a proposal that they would undoubtedly like. They looked at me with curiosity and decided to listen to what I had to say. At that moment, I told them that I worked for a funeral home and that I needed sales to go up. Therefore, the number of deaths should also go up. I offered them a modest commission for each death that fell into their hands as long as the family of the deceased came to my funeral home for the services, in which case they themselves had to figure out how to do it. They accepted without hesitation. For them, it was a job offer. For me, an investment that I hoped would bear fruit, and so it did. In just 1 week, 4 families arrived requesting the service, and the hitmen were in charge of giving me proof that the deceased had fallen into their hands. I gave them the commission, and that was the beginning of the best days of the funeral home. We had the freedom to raise our prices, and still people kept choosing us. I never told anyone about my business because I couldn't risk being exposed. I spent months like this, and the director gave me all the credit since in certain circumstances, I was the one who went to the family who had recently lost a loved one and immediately converted them into clients. I found myself billing a lot of money, even though I gave those people that commission. That's when the day came that ended it all. By then, we had already built a new room to do 2 wakes at the same time. which I always proposed and which they finally fulfilled. That day, a messenger from my partners came telling me that some colleagues had murdered a boy, but that this time they didn't want any deal for him. They never gave me any reason for making that decision, and I found it strange. Before he left, he told me that the family of the deceased was going to contact me, and he advised me to turn them down. However, that was something we couldn't do. We had a reputation to maintain if we wanted to stay ahead of the competition, so that same day we received a call from the family of that boy that they got rid of. I never knew if it was accidental or what, but I wasn't going to ignore anyone, so I advised them, and we did the whole procedure as we had been doing. The only thing running through my mind was that I was going to keep 100% of the profits from that service. By the time the body was ready for its wake, we announced it to the family and decreed that it would take place the next day. I stayed in the funeral home organizing things and all that when suddenly I felt a chilling discomfort. I felt like someone was watching me at all times, something I had never felt in my job, which was working with the dead. But no matter how much I looked in the rooms and halls, I couldn't find anyone. After that, I started to see out of the corner of my eye as if shadows were crossing over my side. I began to wonder if there was any connection with the body of the young man that my partners didn't want to have anything to do with. I went to see him myself. He was a boy of about 23 years old, nothing out of the ordinary. I finished getting everything ready and left, but recorded the face of the deceased. The next day at the wake, I would get the biggest surprise of my life. There were the relatives watching over the young man's body, but in the background, next to the last chairs, I managed to see a well-dressed boy hiding behind the column. Only half of his body was visible, and he was looking at the coffin. He caught my attention, so I approached him to talk to him, but I was surprised to discover that he was the same one who was supposed to be dead. I thought I was hallucinating or that it was someone very similar, but no, it was the same one, and right at that moment, he covered his entire body behind that column and then disappeared completely. I hurried to the lobby, wondering what I had just seen, but then I saw the boy's father coming up behind me, and he asked me with great curiosity and some impatience if I had seen something. And I had no choice but to tell him what I thought I had seen. When I finished telling him, I saw his face waiting to see his reaction, but the man, instead of crying or being filled with sadness, put a huge smile on his face, as if he had received very good news when he heard that, without caring what I thought. He began to tell me everything, telling me with great enthusiasm that his son had succeeded, that he had been able to give up his soul after so many years of praying and doing black magic rituals in order to transcend and have eternal life in the astral plane. In that state, his son could take revenge on those who ended his life, handing them over to eternal torture in hell. I had no words to say after everything he said. I limited myself to putting on a shocked face, and he simply thanked me for having the confidence to tell him what I saw. After that, he came back to the room with a completely different attitude than before he heard me. I just waited for the wake to finish and to finish everything so I could forget about it, and curiously after that, the criminals never contacted me again for the deal we had. I'm sincerely glad it ended because who knows what happened to all of them. They're probably no longer alive, and if I had continued, maybe I would have ended up like them too,